welcome you. Delighted to welcome you to this event on behalf of the English program. This program is part of a series that we in the English program run for our students. It's part of a series of presentations on careers that are especially well suited to English majors, and especially careers that people might not think about off the top of their heads. So that's part of our efforts to kind of make connections between our students and our alumni and professionals out there. And for the students who are here in the audience, we look forward to inviting you back to a panel in a few years to tell us what you're up to. So today's focus is careers in librarianship. And I want to thank Dr. Ed Battistella for convening and moderating this panel. I'm going to turn it over to you, Ed.
Right. And I'll be a sort of immoderate moderator. I'm really going to sort of introduce folks and then ask them to say a little bit about what they do and what their career path has been. So today we've got Dale Vidmar, currently the interim university librarian at SOU and an SOU alum from the last century. Dr. Melissa Anderson, who's on the SOU faculty, is the community and engagement and research services librarian and also the chair of the faculty senate. Rio Picollo is the technical services student librarian at the Huihua Library at the University of British Columbia and is just finishing her master's degree in library science. Brystan Strong is the Youth Services Coordinator for the Jackson County Library Services. Brenda Shelton is the Tween Reference Assistant at the Beaverton City Library. And Jasmine Waters is the current Resource Sharing and Fulfillment Lead at the Haddon Library. So I'm gonna, I think maybe I will ask Dale to go first
since I'm the dinosaur here, right? Yes, I became a librarian before the Earth's crust had hardened, and I've been affiliated with the library since 1988, and I became a student at Southern Oregon University in 1984 because George Orwell told me to do it, and so that's when I actually came back to school. I was in school for a few years at Kent State and then moved to Oregon. And little did I ever know as I began my English career that I would end up in librarianship, because quite honestly, the library kind of was this big place at Kent State. It had 9 floors and a basement, and the basement held the microfilm, and I vowed never ever to go down in a basement to look at microfilm. And lo and behold, in 1996, when I was getting my Master's of Library Science at Kent State, I had to go do some work in microfilm. And I said, this is going to really put me in an awkward position because I would have to break my vow. But they fortunately moved the microfilm to the 2nd floor at that time. And so my vow stands to this day. So never say that I didn't keep a vow, especially a sacred one like that. But I ended up in the library as a graduate assistant in 1988 while doing my my first master's, which was a general studies in English and education. I wanted to be a high school English teacher when I grew up. And it was 3 days into that venture. As a graduate assistant, I worked at the reference desk with a reference librarian, and it was really busy at that time. So this poor student got stuck with me, a graduate assistant who, had library anxiety in a lot of ways, didn't know much about the library, but boy, was I good at browsing and finding things just by walking around. So I was really good at that. And this student asked me for some help, and I actually helped him with his paper and got him into some really good things. And he later on came back with his paper and showed me the A he got on it, which is one of the most fulfilling things of being a librarian, that you've created success in somebody else. But upon helping him, I realized as a teacher, you take sometimes months before you get a teaching moment. And this student would listen to anything I said. If I told him to look up, he'd look up. If I told him to look that way, he'd look that way. And I realized this is a great place for a teaching moment. Teaching in the library was so cool. And so when I became a librarian, it was really about working with people. I really, really loved that piece of it. And I also, at the time I started, it was card catalogs and paper indexes only. And the MLA was, you know, as Ed and anybody from the dinosaur era would tell you, was really hard to navigate because you had to know an author's background, the time they wrote, the country they wrote for, and all that stuff. So when I actually joined the library, it was kind of crazy to use that material. And we had our first computer, which was an ERIC computer. And I looked at it and I said, well, I don't think anyone in the library knows how to run that. So I'll learn that first. And so I started working with the library databases. And there were two, there were ERIC and then later on InfoTrack. And I was really good at it. And I never for years figured out why I was good at working databases. And it took me probably 15 years before one day it kind of dawned on me while working a search that I was playing with all these different words to try to figure out what the right words to search were. And I realized it's about the words. The gameplay of searching a database was about words. That's the English major in me. That's why it works so well. And so that was part of the thing that initially drew me in, helping people and just doing that. So I got my second master's, took me till 1995 because I was living another life as a hardwood floor layer and a gymnasium floor maker. And I went back to Kent State to finish my second master's. And in our library, we have two masters. And then I was the electronic resources coordinator, and then the information literacy instruction and assessment librarian. And then lastly, I ended up as the interim university librarian, something I never dreamed of ever doing. I always just wanted to teach. And that was my whole emphasis of everything I was doing. And I found myself being the person that needed to do this. And what I discovered is that it's all about the people again. And I really love creating an environment of shared governance and where everybody's expertise is explored and enhanced, not through my leadership, but through their own taking responsibility for what they do. And I'll stop talking there.
That's a great summary of a whole career arc.
Yeah.
So let's see, should we go to Melissa next? We'll sort of.
Sure. And I'll say that, Dale didn't want to be university librarian, but we made him do it. It was unanimous. I think the only one who might have voted against him was himself, but everybody else was like, it's got to be Dale. Dale's the one. So it was pretty unanimous. So I started out, I'm a lifelong library user and lifelong library lover. And, I was the kid who would go to the library on summer vacation and check out, 25 books if they would let me. And I was that kid, but for some reason I never thought of going into librarianship. I loved literature and I knew I wanted to be an English major. I also was really, really interested in French. So I was a double major in French and English as an undergrad. And knew I wanted to, at first I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, like my dad and my grandpa and my great grandpa and my whole family are all lawyers. And then I quickly realized as an undergrad that sounded really boring. And I wanted to go and study literature. So I decided to pursue graduate school in comparative literature, which isn't always based in English, but the way I was approaching it was because I was interested in more interdisciplinary work that was sort of the language of science and the discourse of science and English literature. And I got a master's in that and a PhD in that. And I was working on, building a career teaching English and also a lot of writing. I taught a lot of writing courses, but I also taught a few classes that were more research skills and things like that without really necessarily knowing how I should be advising people to do that. But that's the way it goes. Sometimes when you're a grad assistant, you're given these jobs that you may or may not really know how to do. And I was really pursuing that career pretty directly when my sort of personal life took some changes and moved to France for a while, and then to move back to the States to a really tiny town on the Northern California coast that's quite isolated, and there are no colleges there. The nearest one is a community college an hour and a half away. And so there weren't any jobs in higher ed, even though that's what I'd kind of built my whole career towards. And so I worked in other things for a while in small business development and in elementary education as an administrator, and did those kinds of things. And I felt like I really wanted to get back to education in some way. And I thought, I was actually talking to my yoga instructor at the time, and she was like, she had a PhD in cultural anthropology. And she's like, I always wish I'd gone into librarianship. I don't know why I didn't. I'm like, me too. Like, why didn't I? And then I thought, oh, well, it's too late. And then I started looking into it. And I'm like, it's totally not too late. And in fact, there are all these library degrees from really respected schools you can get online. You don't even have to go there, which is good because I live an hour and a half away from the nearest town, which has 25,000 people. So it's not a big town either. And so I applied to San Jose State University, which has a really well-known library school that's very technology focused, and it's an 100% online program. So I went there and I got my my master's in library and information science. And then I moved again to Portland, and all of a sudden, so many libraries, like public libraries, academic libraries, all these options opened up to me once I moved to a bigger city. And I worked in public libraries for a while. And then I worked at Portland State and also at University of Portland before I got my job here at SOU. So started out in English and teaching writing and teaching English, but ended up in librarianship sort of because I was in a place where there weren't a lot of other options. But then, it turned out that I really loved it. A lot of my job like Dale's was teaching. Because I had a very strong background in teaching, I naturally went for jobs that really focused on instruction. And that is a huge part of my job, is doing library instruction and research sessions and things like that. I'm really passionate about information literacy and what that means for today's students. And on the campus engagement part of my job is also outreach to the campus and to students.
Well, thanks. And I think the Portland connection is a good segue to introduce Brenda. So.
I wondered if that's how it was going to go. Hi, I'm Brenda, and I currently work in public library setting at Beaverton City Library. And when I started out at SOU, I was actually a theater major, and then I switched over to English and was also a minor in gender, women, and sexuality studies. And while I was on campus, I worked at what was then the Women's Resource Center, doing a lot of programming and helping people connect to resources. And that's where I kind of got the idea to go into public librarianship, because I had some family friends who were public librarians and kind of realized that, like working, connecting people to resources and kind of being somewhat of a social service work and programming and stuff was basically a lot of what they were doing at the public library. So I ended up going to library school at University of Wisconsin-Madison. I actually went on campus there. And while I was there, worked in an academic library there, but then also volunteered at Madison Public Library doing programming, helping out with programming for tween age kids. And then when I graduated, my parents have some health issues. And so I knew that I needed to move back to the Portland area to help them out. And I had some connections at some local libraries. And that's how I kind of stumbled into Beaverton City Library, as they hire a lot of temporary positions in the summer to help out with summer reading. And so that's where I got my foot in the door there at Beaverton City Library. And it just so happened that when my summer position was ending, one of the reference assistants, who was a tween focused programming reference assistant, had left for another job. And I just so happened to get her job, which was really lucky because it's very competitive in this area to get a job. And I am only part-time there, but also doing on-call work as well at both of our branches. And I will say that most of the people that I work with have MLSs, but are working as reference assistants. So not librarian title positions, but part-time paraprofessional work, which is what I do. But it's basically all of the things that our librarians do. We just don't do any collection development work. So I'm on the service desk. I work the children's desk, the teen desk, and the adult desk. and I do a lot of programming. Prior to COVID, I was doing a program every week with tweens doing DIY craft programming. And then I also did regular teen programming. In our area, the youth really likes like DIY and crafting and all that kind of stuff. So doing a lot of that stuff, but also all ages programming. I also started a sensory play group for children with autism and other sensory sensitivities. And then I've done a lot of work training and doing inclusive training for our librarians to make our story times more inclusive for all children. A lot of different stuff. So like desk work, programming, training, outreach work, summer outreach. It's a lot. I feel like I do a lot of different things, which is so interesting, like things that I never thought that I would be doing as a librarian, like making crafts every week and doing all this kind of stuff. But I would say I agree with what others have said, that like what really drew me, especially to public librarianship work, was working with people and helping people. And I think that if you are interested in public librarianship, you really need to keep in mind that like, I feel like a lot of the time I'm a social worker and a community resource first. And that's a lot of the work that we do. Tax help, helping connect people to housing resources, and also crisis de-escalation is something that happens a lot, especially at our library. And that's really something that's increased in the past couple of years, just with everything going on in people's lives as well. So it's definitely a very wide range of things that you get to do every day. I think that's the best way that I can summarize all that.
Well, let's see. I was thinking of going north to Rio, but since you mentioned the public library setting, I'm going to ask Brystan to jump in.
Sure. My name is Brystan Strong. I am what my coworkers call an unlikely librarian, because I was not that kid who did a lot of reading. When I was really young, when I was really young, I did. When I was really young, I would have told you that the only thing I liked doing was reading, writing, and dinosaurs. I only liked those three things. I wanted nothing else in my life besides reading, writing, and dinosaurs. And so, you know, and I read all the greatest hits, as many kids that grew up in the 90s did, you know, Goosebumps and Babysitter's Club and all that. I devoured them. But then when like junior high, I think when you had to really start analyzing the things that you were reading and you were worried about getting what the author meant correct, and, you know, teachers were quizzing you on all these things, reading became really not fun for me. It became hard, it became a chore, and I didn't want to do it. And so I only did it in school because I had to, and I didn't like it. And so then I was like, you know, as I got older, it didn't necessarily become easier, but I began to like it more. I began liking reading more. And I was like, I really want to like reading. And so I pursued English as a major. I was like, I'm going to force myself to do it. I want to like it. I want to understand it. I want to write, you know, so, you know, I just kind of threw myself in there. And like many English majors, I wanted to be a teacher. And some of that was because I wanted to kind of rebel in this like teenage angst dream of mine, and be the cool teacher and the teacher that, you know, that I needed, that I didn't have. But then, you know, at SEU, I was a couple of years into my degree and I woke up and I was just like, I don't want to be a teacher. I was like, uh-oh, that's a problem, because I'm already sunk this much money in here. What am I going to do? You know, and I really had to do some soul searching and be like, well, what can I do with this English degree? And, you know, and I went back to all the things that in my childhood and my teenage years, and I was like, what did I need? I was like, oh, I needed a librarian. That's what I needed. And I did, you know, as a teen, in some ways I did participate in summer reading program, or I tried to, and I always had these really great librarians who told me, you know, during the summer is your reading time. Read all the Goosebumps you want in the summertime. Who cares? You know, and I that really resonated with me. And I also talking to librarians, one of the things that they would say constantly was that this is a constantly changing field. It's not the same. It's not going to be the same. Your first year and your last year as a librarian are not going to be the same, because technology is constantly advancing. The way people consume information is changing. So it's going to be a constantly evolving job, which really appealed to me. So after I got my English degree from SOU, I also went to San Jose State University and got my master's in library and information science from there. I studied public librarianship, youth librarianship specifically. I took a lot of classes on children's librarianship, teen librarianship. I took a class on tween librarianship, and I loved it all. And so, I started out locally in Jackson County Library Services as a volunteer. I helped shelve books. I helped organize closets, all the things that the branch managers don't have time to do. I helped with that. Meanwhile, I went to grad school and I was trying to plant little idea seeds and stuff in branch managers' heads, and so that they knew who I was and be like, well, Brystan, she's got some great ideas. And I just worked my way up the ladder from there. I got hired as a shelver at the Medford branch, which is the main branch of JCLS. JCLS has 15 branches, in case you didn't know. So I worked as a shelver, and then I got another little promotion. I worked at the circulation desk in Medford. And then I was the interim children's librarian in Medford for a little while because they were without one. So they kind of just plugged me in to help at the desk a lot of the time. I worked a year at the talent branch. So that allowed me to see the differences between one of our main bigger branches, which is Medford, and then a small town branch, which is talent. And I got a lot more responsibility there. I did story times and programs, and helped kind of manage the branch when the branch manager wasn't there. So it gave me a lot of really great insight into things that I couldn't do at the Medford branch because it's so compartmentalized. And then I got this role, which is the youth services coordinator. And so what that means is that I oversee all of the youth related goings on at all 15 branches in Jackson County. Everything from programming to outreach to collection development, policy and procedure, all of that. Plus I directly manage our outreach to childcare program and our educator support services outreach department, which is new as of 2020, which was a great time to have a new department start, as you can imagine. But, and then everything in between, summer reading program, winter reading programs, storytime trainings, all of that.
Now, this is great. I'm learning so much. And I'm going to turn it now to our neighbor from the north, Rio.
Hi, I'm Rio. I graduated from SOU with a degree in English in 2015, I think. It was double major in English and interdisciplinary studies, focusing on linguistics with ed. After that, I worked as a copywriter in Medford for a little while, and then in sales and marketing for a publishing company as well in the Valley. And in doing that, worked pretty closely with libraries and library acquisitions and library vendors like Hoopla, and decided from there, even though it hadn't been really a plan beforehand, to pursue an MLIS. And I applied to the University of British Columbia and have been living in Vancouver and studying since 2019, September 2019. So I've gone through, I've been in school pre-pandemic and during, so it's been an interesting ride for the last 2.5 years, and I am about to graduate from there in May of this year. I have been, I've had a number of student jobs as work study and co-op jobs for the mostly focused in technical services and metadata and cataloging, particularly in ways to improve representation for marginalized communities in catalog records, primarily Indigenous and queer subject headings. So we've been working on some really interesting grant funded projects for the Queer Community Library I'm on the board of here at University of British Columbia, that where we're interviewing authors about how they're represented in catalog records and things. So it's been an interesting process, and I am looking forward to starting the actual job hunt soon. think you're muted, Ed.
Muted. I am still muted. There we go. And that's a great segue to Jasmine, who's just graduated a year ago and is starting her her sort of library adventure. So Jasmine.
Yeah, I did just graduate last spring, so this is my first year out of school, and I'm the resource sharing and fulfillment lead here at Hannon Library. So I started my library journey about midway through my college term, and I didn't really consider it beforehand. Actually, I started working in a library around the same time I became an English major. Beforehand, I was working towards a degree in dance and dance education. Then I sustained a small injury that wouldn't have held me back, but was going to extend my graduation date past where I wanted to. I wanted to get out and to transfer and to move forward. So taking that aside and deciding to focus on other interests, I became an English major. And at the same time, I started looking for a new job. And I found one at my local public library on the recommendation from my mother, who is actually also in libraries. She's a library assistant at a public library. So I started working at my local public library in a big library system because I lived in the Bay Area at the time. And so I was working at the Contra Costa County system, which is a large library system, more than I think 20 at least libraries in the system. And I started working at my hometown one as a shelver, as well as a shelver on loan to one of the smaller libraries in the system, the town over. It's mostly college students there. So it was me and a few high school students. We were the main shelvers for the whole library. And we were all really, really new because that was the same year the library at my hometown reopened. For the last 10 years before that, we had been in a small little closet in our community rec center. So it was a big new library, a lot of job opportunities. I applied, and when they needed more people on, they hired me. So at the same time, I was starting my English degree, and I was kind of figuring out what I wanted to do with that now that I wasn't focusing on dance and dance education. And I was working in this shelving job, and I started to really realize that I loved all the aspects of librarianship that actually I think most people find frustrating, which is I really liked the tedium. I liked the information sides of it. I was big into organization. I really liked learning about the call numbers, why they work, why Dewey Decimal Systems organize the way it is. And so I started getting really interested in that. And so when I transferred into SOU my junior year, I applied for another position in the library at Hannon Library, starting as a circulation assistant here in Access Services. So I went from doing what we call stacks maintenance here in Hannon to being the public facing portion of the library, working with checking out books and helping with questions, just that front desk kind of work. From there, I pretty rapidly fell into pandemic library times. I was only at SOU for 2 terms before we shut down and went to remote. And so I was only at the library for 2 terms before we shut down and went remote. But luckily the library continued to offer restricted amounts of services and stay open throughout the time. So I continued to work here at Hannon all throughout the pandemic. I did that for another couple of terms, and then about midway through my last year here, Access Services restructured, and what was before was a circulation job, I began to pick up more what's called resource sharing, which is the lending and borrowing of books from other libraries. So we borrow books from Summit and then ILL, and then we will lend them as well. And so I started working almost solely in resource sharing. I became the resource sharing lead student, where at the same time I was working on my library capstone and was working as actually staff support for Kate, who was our resource sharing and fulfillment lead at the time, who was had often had to be away and needed some help. So I started stepping up, doing a lot of the staff end of ILL Iliad processing, all of the like technical sides of how you request books from other libraries. From there, I finished, once I graduated and finished my capstone and did all of that stuff, I started looking for other jobs, but we were still in pandemic situation, so it's very difficult to find something. I was having some trouble just getting interviews. I had been putting out applications, and then one day Kate emailed me asking if I was willing to step on as the temporary library technician 2 that they were looking for. Access services had been understaffed for most of the pandemic. And we were in a hiring freeze for most of the pandemic, so we couldn't fill up that space. And right as I was graduating, the hiring freeze ended and they started looking for more people. So she extended the offer to me and I took it. That's how I began working as a temporary library technician 2 here in access services at Hammond Library. From there, we had another staff member in access services leave. And at that time, I started picking up more responsibility. I started supervising the students of the circulation. So I manned a 9-student group, doing their scheduling, dealing with all of the training, onboarding, all of that process. I worked with the other staff members to hire, and as well as the general service desk stuff I was dealing with. So I dealt with service desk statistics. I was dealing with all of these staff processes that you would see of a permanent member. And as they began hiring a replacement for the staff member who left, I applied and they hired me. It was around November, and at that same time, we had another shift in structure here in access services. My old supervisor, Kate, who was resource sharing and fulfillment, took up the position as the access services and assessment librarian, leaving her position open. And she recommended me for that place. So now I work as the resource sharing and fulfillment lead, once again, kind of working on that side of ILL Summit, processing books from other libraries and lending them out, which is kind of my main love here. I find it very fun. It's always a mystery that pops up that gets your attention. And that's the part that really draws me in resource sharing, is that solving mysteries. Someone will put a request for a book that's just impossible to find, and you really have to dig for it. And once you do, it's really rewarding. So that's where I am now.
Yeah, I think I've been one of those people that's put in impossible requests, but I was just going to say, well done, Dale and Melissa, in getting Jasmine to be on the staff. So we've got some time now for questions from some of the faculty who are here and some of the folks in the audience. So just unmute yourself, show us your, and ask what questions you've got. Don't be shy.
So to take up that quiet space for just a second, Jasmine's moved so fast through a sequence of events after she graduated. It's been amazing, and she's the kind of person that just has blossomed really, really fast. And so she kind of moved position to position. And I kind of worry that she'll go off and get a second master's and then, or not a first master's and a second master's in 6 weeks, and then come for Melissa and my job.
Me for UL, end of this year. I'm coming for it.
So I
But
have a
she-
question for anybody that kind of relates to that. Brenda, you talked about it's a fairly competitive world, and Rio, you're talking now about starting a job search, I guess, or maybe you're in a job search. And I'm just curious if any of you can comment on what the job market is like and what kinds of openings are you're looking at.
I mean, we've failed searches because, I mean, we've had a lot of open positions. And so I think it varies really, really widely. I mean, where Brenda is, it's super competitive. Like the Portland area is crazy competitive for libraries, especially public libraries. Multnomah County Library is wonderful, and it is nearly impossible to get a job there. I knew people that had been in the queue with like excellent qualifications for years, and then they were offered a position like shelving books. And these are people with multiple advanced degrees, all kinds of specialist knowledge, bilingual, I mean, like everything, right? So certain markets are crazy competitive, but in academic librarianship, it kind of depends on what you can do. So there are perhaps, in certain areas, they might be really in need of people who can manage archives and do digital curation. In other areas, they might really be short on people who know cataloging and metadata and that sort of thing. In other areas, they are just really desperate for people who do more of what Dale and I do, which is, instruction, student support, student success, student engagement, that side of things. So academic libraries, I feel like there are a lot of jobs out there. And, if you can bring something to the table that makes you, an experienced candidate, you have a really good chance of getting a pretty good job somewhere. For the public libraries, it really depends on where you're willing to go. If you want to be at Multnomah County Library, I think it's going to be hard, but.
Yeah, and I can speak. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead,
I was
Brenda.
just going to speak a little bit more to that. Yeah, definitely. And when I was in library school, there were a lot of people in my cohort where, like, if you wanted a full-time librarian position, it had to be in a rural area was your best bet for getting something like that. And when you're accepting that kind of position, you have a lot more responsibility and a lot more things that you're in charge of, which you spoke to earlier. But yeah, in the Portland area, so I work in Washington County, which is right next to Multnomah County. And Multnomah County is interesting because they do hire out of a pool. So first you have to get into that pool and then fight within that pool. And I have several coworkers who have tried for years and years and years to get something at Multnomah County and just never got anything. And in my library system, a lot of the openings that we have are more manager level. That's usually what we're hiring, and not a lot of librarian positions. I'm the youngest person on staff, I believe, and have been the entire time that I've worked there. And most of my coworkers who have librarian title positions have had that position for years and are not going to leave until they retire. It's a lot of once you get a position, you don't let it go. And so then you have a lot of reference assistants who pretty much everyone I work with who's a reference assistant has an MLS, has had a librarian position before, but because of the way the area is, reference assistant positions are pretty much the main thing that you're going for. And competing with other people for. And like I said, it's pretty much the same as a librarian position. We just don't do any collection development work, but we assist in that in various ways. And then what I've also noticed a lot within my specific library is we have had some librarians during the pandemic who have left their positions. And instead of rehiring a full-time librarian, they have split those positions into 2 part-times and hired more part-time people. So you're going to see a lot of that kind of stuff happening that is like a whole other story about why that's happening. But so you're going to see a lot, yeah, of part-time stuff like that. and it's very competitive. So yeah, it definitely depends on where you want to be or where you have to be, and just making it work within there. So a lot of people I know work, like I said, I have my part-time position, and then I'm also on call at both of our branches, and I have previously been on call at other libraries in the system as well. And most people I work with are in that kind of situation where they have a part-time position and then they work at several other libraries on call, or they have some other position in some other field. That's a lot of what the reality is in the Portland area. Yeah.
It's tough here too, I think, you know, even though we're not big like Multnomah County for sure, but because, you know, I mean, and we have 15 libraries, so you think, wow, 15 libraries, surely there's a librarian position somewhere, but there's not. You know, in our Medford and Ashland branches, you know, we have designated librarians. We have children's librarians and teen librarians and reference librarians, but only in those two branches. You know, all of our other branches, there's a branch manager who generally is, it's an MLIS required position, but again, it's a manager title. And then the rest are associates. And that's not to say that they're not doing the same work. You know, these associates are doing story time, they're shelving books, they're helping at their desks, you know, answering reference questions just like a librarian would. You know, but they're part-time and it's considered a fairly entry-level type position. And you go out to these teeny tiny branches, Butte Falls, Prospect, Applegate, there's 2 staff total. There's the branch manager and then 1 other associate. And in the similar vein, you know, the branch manager has been there for 20 years and will be there for another 20 years until they retire. So there's just not a lot of openings. Right, we have, I mean, there's a lot of turnover in those entry-level positions, as is the case, I think, in a lot of fields outside of even librarianship. But yeah, as far as librarian work, not a lot.
I have a related question that I'll start directing it toward Melissa, who's actually got her hand up and wants to jump in. But my question is for Melissa was, given your sort of family background, had you ever considered law librarianship? And the sort of broader question is, are there places outside of public libraries where there are opportunities, law libraries, industrial libraries? I know
Yes, we call them special libraries.
Yeah.
In the library world, they're called special libraries. And yes, absolutely. And I even know I'm on a committee with the OLA, Oregon Library Association, and one of the librarians on the committee is a law librarian. So, and I have a very close friend who's a medical librarian too. That's another whole area. And one that we haven't talked about because there's no one here who does it is school librarian, right? And so there's a lot of programs that are hybrid programs for like a master's in teaching and certification as a school librarian. And in some states, it's actually mandated that the school librarians have an MLS and, you know, a library degree. In other places, they don't require it. Sometimes they require like a media specialist kind of a thing. In some places, they don't require anything. And they just, you know, any person off the street can become a librarian, right? Without actually knowing that much about it or about collection development or anything. So it varies pretty widely by district and by state and what the rules are. But that's also a really interesting field, school librarianship. If you like working with kids, you know, that can be a really great option too. But yeah, absolutely. There are needs for law librarians. And if you when you go to library school, there are classes on those specific things because they are pretty unique. You have a very different sort of patron base if you're a law librarian, and you have to have different knowledge. And of course, if you have like a legal background or a paralegal background, it can be super helpful, but you don't necessarily have to have that. Same thing with the medical librarians. The one I know didn't have a background in medicine or anything and just got very interested in it and ended up specializing in that.
Right. Yeah, Dale.
Yeah, let me take my hand down first because I always forget to do that. One of the things I would say is, like any position anywhere, or any job seeking anywhere, having an internship is like so helpful. And so, you know, Jasmine working as a student led her into a spot where we could see her potential and move her into a temporary position. And then ultimately she had an edge because of that into the more permanent position. I would say my assistantship or when I was doing my degree, I had an internship at the University of Akron, and I was designing instructional web pages at a time when we were still just doing HTML. I was a very early adopter in that. And when I walked out of that internship, they offered me a position at that university. And when I said, no, I'm really looking to move back out west. I'm from Cleveland, and no, I didn't want to go to Akron, which is like a second place where Goodyear was. And no, I just didn't want to go there. But I really loved the people there, and it was really kind of interesting to have that. So that person knew Carol Butcher at Oregon State and said, I can call Carol Butcher and see if they have a position for you over there. And it just as it happened, a position opened up over here. I didn't get that position, but I got offered an adjunct position for 1 year, and then applied for a position more permanently. And so the internship kind of leads to stuff, but it also leads you to an edge that you have some experience, because when you walk out of a librarian degree, you don't have any experience, and everybody's asking for experience. And how do you get experience when you haven't worked there? So that's one of the big things. Getting an internship, getting your foot in the door some way. The internship's a nice way because people can take a chance on you. You can become multiple different things in that internship. The other thing I want to say just about the library in general, and if you've heard everybody speak, the coolest thing about working in the library for an English major, it's the only position, our work position, that you can do in today's era that's truly like working in the Renaissance era. You learn more and more about everything, as opposed to, typically when you get a doctorate, you know more and more about less and less because you get focused in on what you're actually researching. And we go the opposite way. We're so all over the place. When you mentioned law, I just had a law question today, how to write a brief. And I was like, Pelican brief was the first thing that came to my mind. And so you get that kind of juggling so many different things, which truly makes you a jack of all trades in one way, but it also makes you just a really interesting person, and it's an interesting career because of that.
Well,
You know a little about a lot of things.
That's me.
The end of that phrase is jack of all trades, master of none. So
Yep.
I'm not sure that's really what we want our tagline to be, but
We've just got the little Swiss Army knife for the English major. That's our tagline. I want to make sure to respect everybody's time, and we're just about out of time. So anybody have a final shout out or thought they want to say? If not, I'll thank everybody and give a big round of applause to our panelists, Dale, Melissa, Rio, Brystan, Brenda, and Jasmine. So thanks, everybody. This has been really great, and I hope you all sort of stay in touch as well and are able to share some tips and tales as you go forward.
Thank you, Ed, and everyone for making this possible. As Melissa said, I think we all love doing this when we get an opportunity to do it. I think this is my third or fourth one. And this is the first one on Zoom, but I also want to give you permission to feel free to use this going forward for all your students, if that helps you.
Thank you so much, everyone. And we will absolutely be sharing this with students who weren't able to be here today.
And I'll jump in and say, I'm always available if someone wants to shoot me an email, ask me a question about what it's like to be a librarian here, even here locally in Jackson County. I'm happy to answer any of those questions. So.
Yeah, same to anyone who's going preparing for the application process or looking into things like that. For someone who's fairly recently done that sort of thing, feel free to reach out.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of February.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.